Okay, so let's talk about the end of US hegemony. Now, this I think does follow on quite nicely from the last segment because I was saying I am a Western chauvinist. I do think the West is the best, and it's going to matter when China overtakes as the dominant global culture. And I think that is in the process of happening. Before I get into this segment, though, I do want to talk about a segment that we've got on our premium side, and this is Josh and Bew discussing how the United States achieved its dominance and global power in the first place. That is a superb example to a starter to what I'm going to talk about today in this segment. So let's get into this segment. Look, the background to what is happening at the moment is a big deal. And I like to pick stuff for the podcast segments that mainstream media is not talking about, and they should be. Maybe they're not because they don't understand it or because it doesn't fit the agenda. But we are seeing a major geopolitical shift at the moment. Now, for me, this is one of the reasons why global Western leaders are behaving so badly at the moment. It's because they can feel this loss of confidence that they're going through because there is this shift in dominance from west to east. And the story that I'm going to pick on to highlight this is the recent visit of President Xi of China to Saudi Arabia. Let's throw up the Zero Hedge article because this is a good introduction to the story. Now, basically, so Xi goes to Saudi Arabia. He gets the full red carpet treatment. The king comes out to the airport to meet him. And they proceeded to sign about 30 billion worth of agreements between the two countries. And look, this is coming off the back of a really extraordinary period of US weakness that we've been going through. So under elected President Joe Biden, you saw the complete rout of the US forces from Afghanistan. And I remember watching that at the time thinking, oh, this is a herald of something a lot bigger. But it was weird at the time. The press didn't want to talk about it. They just wanted to.
It was the biggest embarrassment that America has seen since Vietnam. Easily, they've never faced such a catastrophic defeat from such backwater peoples as well. Just a bunch of guys,
a bunch of beardy weirdies with sandals.
Beardy weirdies.
It's like Lib Dems with Kalashnikovs, and they drove off the US military and got them to leave, hundreds of billions of equipment behind.
I think you're making the Lib Dems sound far too intimidating there.
Yeah, I need a better example than that. But it also comes off the back of the energy crisis that we're experiencing as well. Again, this is the US-led effort to sanction the world's biggest energy exporter, which was not helped by Joe Biden shutting down the Keystone Pipeline on his very first day. So let's pick up on the key threads of this article before I go into what I really think is going on here. So the article is talking about how there were pledges for further trade agreements, pledges to extend military cooperation, which is really significant. The 29 billion in agreements signed. They're going to set up a Huawei cloud computing region in Saudi Arabia, and they're building electrical vehicle manufacturing in Saudi Arabia and supplying hydrogen batteries. So this is significant because essentially what's going on here is China is saying we can buy a lot more of your oil. You don't need to sell it to the US. We are going to buy it. So we're going to handle the hydrocarbon side of things, but also we're going to provide you the tech so that you can transition. So if we are moving into a post-hydrocarbon world, we're going to make sure you're on the leading edge of that as well. So we are providing a solution for now and the future as well. But the most interesting thing this article talks about is how that most of these conversations were held behind the scenes. So we don't actually get to find out the full extent of what was discussed. Now, almost certainly, because these are themes that have been going on with the Saudis and the Chinese for some time, is it's going to include things like advanced military sales. It's going to include the expansion of the 5G and 6G network across that whole region.
The 6G now?
Yep, the 6G network as well.
I've not heard about that one.
And yeah, it's I don't know if you can name all the G's. It's like Snow White, isn't it? But and that's all going to be underpinned by Huawei, of course, which is essentially a sort of Chinese spy network. So anybody moving through this area is going to be subject to whatever level of surveillance that goes with. And the most contentious bit of all is the selling of Saudi oil to China denominated in yen. Right now, that is a really big deal. I want to explain to that. Although, actually, I just want to comment on how the White House responded to this. So the White House put out a statement. Let me read this. warning that China's attempt to exert its influence worldwide were not conducive to the international order. Right.
Oh, that's a big threat coming from Biden. Oh, what's Biden going to do? Biden's got his hand over that big red button. He's geriatric. He's Parkinson's. He's shaking over it.
But let's unpick that. So China's attempt to exert influence in the world, right? All the US has done since basically since it entered the Second World War is exert its influence over the world. So,
we live under the US hegemony.
And then he says it's not conducive to the international order. Well, what order? So basically what he's saying is our order. So, this is why as the Western influence starts to diminish, they're desperate to put in place what they call the global rules-based order, which is we make the rules and then the rest of the world has to live with them even after the rest of the world becomes dominant.
And one of the things that I think makes a country like China, who are, as far as I can tell from looking from the outside, deeply nationalist and deeply interested in embedding traditional roles and gender roles and such within the national population.
Yeah, weird stuff like that.
Yeah, they look over at America and they see, okay, what's the American order trying to do? Okay, they're trying to make everyone gay, and they're trying to make sure that everybody can dye their hair stupid colours. They're trying to make sure that everybody can have as much degenerate sex as they want and take as many drugs as they want. They want every city across the world to be San Francisco. And China goes, nah, not feeling that.
Well, and it's also the case, of course, that the US is pushing that agenda worldwide. They have made it very clear that it is part of their agenda to roll out exactly that.
Yeah, they want the degenerate monoculture.
And it turns out that places like Saudi Arabia are not desperately fans of that sort of way of thinking.
I don't know. I feel like someone could have predicted this.
Yeah, there's something in their culture that made you think, no, that's not going to work. But of course, if you change sides, and that is essentially what's happening here, they're changing sides from the US to China. You don't have to do any of that agenda. It doesn't come with it. So let's look at the background of it. Let's just talk about the petrodollar, because this is what really makes it work. So look. The US has been the superpower. They are a global superpower, and unlike previous empires, they've not gone down the route of basically extracting tribute, because that's normally why you have an empire. Historically, you have an empire. The empire sends resources and taxes back to the home country or the home city, and it's that extraction of tribute that works them. The US has never done that. So does that mean the US has never taken tribute? Well, no, because it did it through the petrodollar. What the petrodollar basically is back in the 70s, the US went to Saudi and they said, we give you security guarantees if you agree to sell all oil denominated in dollars. Right, so that's clever. First of all, because the House of Saud back in the 70s was not as strong as it is today. So they lapped it up. If the US have got their back and are going to help them out from any internal or even external force, they went with that. So they started denominating in dollars, and this is where it gets really clever, right? Because where the Saudis lead, and they were allowed to have OPEC on the back of this as well, where the Saudis lead, all of the other oil producers had to go along with it or get invaded. You can take your pick. And that means the whole world obviously needs oil. But in order to buy oil, they need dollars. So where are you going to get dollars from? Well, you're going to make stuff or produce resources, and you're going to give them to the US in exchange for pieces of paper with the president's face on it. So the US couldn't exchange paper for real things, which made them incredibly rich, along with their own ingenuity and work ethic and other things that they used to have. And on top of that, because the rest of the world is then sloshing around in dollars, they've got to do something with them, right? So what do? Well, they buy dollar-denominated debt. So, the US can run a permanent deficit. It can have a massive military. It can have Medicaid. It can have all of these extra things because it knows that the rest of the world is going to buy its debt so it can run this deficit and make the whole thing work. So this relationship between the US and Saudi is the key to the US being an empire.
Just wondering as well, because I know that the US dollar is basically the reserve currency for...
Made possible by this system, by the petrodollar.
So it's made possible by that system. How does that play into it as well? Is it just another case where they have to buy US
That's because
debt?
the world has so many dollars sloshing around in it that you can make the dollar the global reserve currency because there's so much liquidity available in it that, it's the default to go to. So make no mistake, the relationship between the US and Saudi Arabia is of extraordinary importance.
But something tells me, given how important it is, that if Saudi were to just switch sides and decide we don't want to do that anymore, that sounds like it could be a bit catastrophic for the US.
It could be a big deal, and the media should be talking about this, but they're not, and that's why we're talking about it here instead. So, look, what happened when Trump came to power? The first trip that he made was to Saudi Arabia because he recognised the importance of this. What did the Bidens do when they came to power? Well, they decided to call Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince, MBS, a pariah. Yeah, that wasn't particularly smart.
That's not anything I've heard at recommendations for diplomacy, but carry on.
No, so they decided to label Saudi Arabia and MBS in particular as a pariah. At the recent G7 meeting, Biden made a big point about he wasn't going to speak to MBS because he doesn't like him. We've had a whole bunch of the national security apparatus, including National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, going on CNN, absolutely lambasting Saudi Arabia because they didn't sign up to the Russian sanctions. They're working with our enemies. Now, this is the sort of mindset that the current administration has. They are so used to domestic politics where if you don't fall in line with 100% of what they want, they just denounce you. You're just a pariah, you're a Nazi, you're a MAGAist, whatever it is. It is a 100% sign up or we are going after you
Biden
completely.
Can go out in a blood-red background and denounce all of the evil MAGA Republicans who are enemies of the state.
Now, you can kind of get away with that in domestic politics, but you don't do that to Saudi Arabia unless you don't need them anymore.
You especially don't do it if they could then go and strike up a very attractive trade deal with a country where you've offshored a hell of a lot of your own manufacturing to, making you even more vulnerable, because Trump was very good at trying to establish some kind of manufacturing and energy independence within the US, because he recognized, hold up, if we're completely reliant on every other country in the world for all of our resources, this could end bad for us if they decide they don't want to work with us anymore.
And what's essentially happening is the US is not recognising. In fact, the whole Western system, the whole Anglosphere, they're not recognising what's happening. So can we go to the next link? So I apologise in advance. This is a link from the World Economic Forum. So, but the reason I picked them is because they got a really nice graphic. So let's slide down to the. Let's go down to there's a nice colourful bit. Here we go. Right, so take a look at that. Can we just get the bottom of that in screen as well? So,
the UK took quite a fall at some point, didn't it?
Okay, right. So this is basically the world's largest economies, right? And basically what's happening at the moment is the opinion makers in the West and the US, they are stuck in the mindset of 1992. So what's going on in 1992? Well, the blue bit is the Americas. So US is dominant. They're at the top. Canada features. It's a bit far down the list. You got one Asian country, which is Japan, but they pretty much mind their own business, so that doesn't matter. And then you've got all of the the American Empire orbiters, that green European section. They're backing up the US. And then you got Russia down there, and you got China right at the bottom.
Spain just drops off.
Yeah, well, of course, yeah. But I mean, so 1992, that is the mindset that Biden and our political leaders, they all think they're all stuck there, right? What's happening now? Well, it's starting to shift a bit. I mean, sanity has reasserted itself to an extent because the UK has overtaken France and Italy. There's no world where that should be otherwise, of course. But China has really ramped up. But I mean, otherwise, the picture is broadly the same. So the sort of 2008 era. And that probably was the case back in 2008, because before 2008, the green section and the blue bit at the top, the US, they actually used to have economies that did things instead of just literally making money. And when I say making money, I don't mean working hard.
We mean literally fabricating money out of thin air.
Yes, exactly that. That's what they do. So look at 2024. This is the situation that we've got coming right up on us now. It's a completely different picture. China is at the top.
How accurate would you say that these predictions are for 2024?
I would say, if anything, this is understating it. And that's a good point. That's going to be my next link, because all of this is basically measuring. So we're measuring it in US dollars. So when we say that China has the biggest economy, we're measuring it in US dollars. Okay,
and as soon as the US dollar falls and suddenly we're measuring everything in yen, so China's going to be looking pretty good for it.
It's in fact, right. That's my next link. So hold that thought.
All right.
But
Sorry, there was one other thing as well, which is that a few months ago, Josh and I did a Contemplations talking about the economy of China, and Josh was talking about a lot of the economic mismanagement that was going on in China. You know, they've got full cities that are completely abandoned because the housing developers were about to crash, and they just thought, we need to get these people working on stuff. Build a city, no one lives there. Yeah. How would you say that's affected them? Do you think that is going to lead to any sort of economic collapse in China?
It's a mess. They are a centrally planned socialist mess, but they still actually do stuff. They actually produce steel, they actually produce goods, they produce energy, and all of those are things that the Western sphere is trying very deliberately not to do.
So even with the economic mismanagement, they're still in a more independent and stable situation.
I'm not trying to say they're shiny. I'm just trying to say that they have floated to the top because everybody else is torpedoing themselves. So I mean, look at Germany on this chart. Germany used to be number 3. It dropped to number 4 on this chart, which is a couple of years old actually. Germany's dropped down there. But the only reason Germany is on this list at all, Germany has a 2 trillion economy, and that is underpinned by 20 billion of cheap Russian gas. And that's no longer true. They have essentially deindustrialized themselves. So I don't think even Germany's going to hold up on here. So yes, China makes stupid decisions all the time, but that's what we've been doing in Europe, and that's what the US has been doing. And so, we are. It is a sort of a race of self-harmers, effectively.
I've got to say, the predictions for the future, there's some interesting countries popping up almost out of nowhere. Obviously, in 2008, Brazil just suddenly rises up.
Yep.
And then we've got in, what is that, 5th place on the right in 2024, suddenly Indonesia has decided to join the chat. India in 3rd place has decided to jump in as well, whereas before they weren't even players.
It's a completely different picture. And what this is essentially showing is on the left you've got a US, European-led world, and on the right you've got an Asian world.
So I need to get John to start teaching me Mandarin.
Yeah.
Is that what you speak, John? Oh, Cantonese.
All right.
All right, fair play.
Okay, right, next link. Let's now go to the next link. So this is an infographic, and again, this is a slightly older one, but it makes the point quite well. I don't want to go through all of this. Let's just go down to the bit that sticks up at the 3 o'clock position. Yep, you just went past it. Back that bit there. So that bit is total reserves, and the red is China, and the blue is the US. And so I just want to pick out a couple of aspects of this. First one, look. China actually saves. The US is a debtor nation, and that disparity in savings between the two is quite sharp. That tells you something about the countries. Right, let's go down now to the 3 o'clock position. Those bars out to the side. You might need to up a bit. Right, now you might need to zoom out a bit, but these 2 long bars going out here, that displays, this is your question, so this displays the difference in the size of the economy between the US and China. But it's measured in dollars. So according to this, the economy of the US is about 17 trillion, whereas the economy of China is only about 10 trillion. But let's measure it a different way, okay? Let's go down to the bit that juts out to the bottom right, these 2 bars. So this is basically, again, measuring the economy, but instead of doing it in dollars, we're doing it in something called purchasing parity power, so what you can actually buy for your money. And on that metric, and this is from 2015, China has already surpassed the US.
And that was before all of the incredible inflation that's been going on in the US
and everything else. One final thing I'm going to show on here before I move on, quickly to the left, energy consumption. If you look at the amount of energy being consumed in the 2 economies, US is consuming the equivalent of 2,000 million tons of oil equivalent. China is already surpassed that by 3,000 to 2,000. So the amount of energy being consumed now, maybe they're not as efficient as the US, but the point is they're doing something. And it's another way of looking at the economy without having to measure it in dollars. So thanks for the link. We don't need a link, but what I'm essentially talking about here is the reason this is important is anyone who's ever played a real-time strategy game will know.
Any of the real chads out there.
Yeah. The way you win is you turtle at the beginning, you build up your economy, and the reason you do that is because where the economy leads, military power invariably follows.
I mean, this is the actual, if you go back to, I've forgotten the name of the author, Frederick, German author, did the National System of Political Economy.
Yeah, the Nietzsche. No,
not Nietzsche. No,
there's so many Fredericks.
Yeah, you know who I'm on about. He talks about that if you
Klaus
want. No, if you let me just Google it very quickly. But he basically said that if you want to build a strong nation, what you need to do is you need to be protectionist for as long as possible, so that you can build up your own national industries. And then you force everybody else to start accepting your products, and then you force them to be free trade so that you can just exact economic dominion over them.
So whichever Frederick that was, that's exactly right. And that is the game that is taking place at the moment.
Frederick List.
Okay. So that is exactly the game that's taking place at the moment. China and the East is building up their economy. They're not being front foot militarily because they can't yet, because the US is still strong in that respect. But because they have overtaken, or, depending on what measure, even if you want to use a dollar as the metric, even using that metric, China is about to overtake the US. The Asian region as a whole, as we saw, they're overtaking the US, right? And this matters because mismanagement in the West has allowed this to happen far sooner than it should have done. And that means that the dominant culture in the world is going to be one where you can drive over kids in BMWs and then offer a bribe to the family, and that's the expected standard. So
brilliant, can't wait.
Yeah, this matters, and the mismanagement happens. Like I say, you're not going to get any of this on mainstream media. They don't talk about this this change in hegemony, but it is real and it is happening, and it means that the world that we spend the next 30 years in is going to be very different to the world that we spent the last 30 years on.
We hope you enjoyed that segment from the podcast The Lotus Eaters and would like to wish you a very Merry Christmas. If you're stuck for gift ideas this year, you can go over and look at our merch store, which we've just launched. It's available via lotuseaters.com and at the website merch.lotuseaters.com, where you can get everything from t-shirts to pillowcases to mugs and hoodies. So enjoy. If you'd like to keep up to date with all of our new releases, you can go and follow us on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.